Thank you. Thank you for taking your seats. And, I'm going to get started. And I'm so glad the last panel was around creativity because it's a good segue into the next discussion we are going to have, which is around skills. So we are, as most of us realize, we are actually living in an extremely talent scarce era. And, pre-COVID, the shelf life of skills was predicted to be about 5 years. And COVID actually accelerated that, and it brought it down to 3 years. So for those of us in the job market, we realize that how fast our skills are just getting eliminated, so to say. I graduated civil engineering about 23 years back, and I can tell you I used none of what I learned 23 years back. Right? So skills are fast diminishing. And by 2026, 1.4 million workers will need re- and upskilling, out of which 70% is because the jobs will cease to exist. And like all spheres of life, there is a gender disparity we see when it comes to re- and upskilling women as well. And I'm very, very fortunate, I have to say. I know all of the 4 panelists very personally, and I also know their passion. I'm very fortunate to be moderating this panel where we are actually going to talk about how we can, not only how we can have better strategies for re- and upskilling, but also not forget that women is at the center of all of this that is going to come. So let me take pleasure in introducing Amy Bernstein. She's an editor, Harvard Business Review magazine, Harvard Business Review Group. Cynthia Hansen, an esteemed colleague of mine from my past life, Managing Director, Innovation Foundation, the Editorial Group. Tripti, Chief People Officer at Sandoz. Allison Bailey, Managing Director and Senior Partner, Global Leader, People and Organization Practice, BCG, and also a thought leader, I have to add. So, I'm going to start off with my knowledge of you. All of you have successfully navigated some of the large transformations, both when it comes to both business as well as societal, if I take COVID, for instance. And Allison, I'm going to start with you. I just want to, draw on your experience and understand how can companies establish a framework that ensures both re- and upskilling, and sometimes probably also some unlearning, initiatives that are not just reactive, because we always see organizations reactive to something, but be proactive to these technological disruptions, while at the same time promote gender equality?
Okay, that's a good but a very big question. So let me say that the first step for organizations is really to understand that skills is their new North Star. And that means skills is the focus of how they think about recruiting, how they think about hiring, how they think about internal mobility, how they think about the entire human capital value chain. And we actually know, we have some wonderful research, for example, that when you do recruiting based on skills and not just based on education, you're 9 times more predictive of job performance, and you're twice as predictive of job performance versus just work experience alone. So there's wonderful underpinnings to the fact that a focus on skills is really transformative. Now, if I move to upskilling and reskilling, and especially if I think about women, one of the things we see is if folks are actually focused on understanding skills and helping their internal workforces to upskill and reskill, and they move to making sure that they have internal mobility platforms which match the demand for skills with the supply of skills, they're able to actually take away a lot of the bias that they normally have had around filling internal positions. And traditionally, internal positions are only filled 10% internally. When you actually create one of these platforms, you change that percentage significantly. And when you really focus it just on skills and not on someone's age or location or gender, we actually find that the number of women that get placed internally skyrockets. And Seagate Technologies is a good example of that. They saw the female placement in internal roles go up by something like 58%. So we have a lot of opportunity here if we leverage an orientation towards skills to really change the landscape.
Yeah. And Tripti, I'm just following up on that with you because, Allison works with lots of organizations, so she has that perspective from different organizations. And I like how you say about drawing that entire landscape or the life cycle of from recruitment to retirement, so to say. And you have been in large organizations, or should I say organization. So how have you created those frameworks for both and upskilling?
Thank you. Honored to be here. Large organizations come with their own complexities, and you could almost get lost. So it is very important that you start very targeted. So target it on core skills critical to your business. And that's what we did over the years that we've done this. Stay true to what you need most. The second is have an inclusive process and a good infrastructure that will help eliminate, unintended bias. If you don't have process in place, for example, something we did which was simple, but one of the most powerful was mandating balanced slate, balanced panel. And that drove the outcome way more than many. Now, if someone told me there is no way I'm able to pull a balanced panel, I would have a conversation with that leader, or a balanced slate. So that's something that really helped. And the third one, probably most critical, fix your culture first, because both process technology or even anything else won't work if you don't have a learning culture.
Absolutely true. And I think it's a good segue because we cover multiple organizations to one organization, to Cynthia, where we are covering multiple organizations but are also at a very different skill level. So when we talk about, like when Allison and Tripti talks about skills, I think we still stick to, and I don't want to now stereotype and say, the higher end of the skill set, but at Edeco, we have also done the lower end of the skill set. So I also want to hear your thoughts on how can we even create a framework for and upskilling when we're talking about completely the extreme end of the skill set?
That's a great question. And actually, we spend a lot of time in the Innovation Foundation looking at this. And we've come up with a couple of things that you see as a red thread of what is well-intended but doesn't actually work. So I'll give you 3 examples. One is trainings are often generalized. And it doesn't mean that they are the skills that a person wants. It doesn't mean that those are the skills that will lead someone to that next career step. They're just very generic. And so, if you have an example of, we're going to offer trainings in project management, how are you going to use that in your job? How is it going to make you more agile? How is it going to make you a more valuable employee? And by the way, we're going to offer it only during business hours and only in person. So it sounds good, it will not work. It's not personalized. Another example is often there's a very strong emphasis put on the demand. We've got these people who are about to leave the company, let's just train them up. And often it's done with an external provider. That external provider may not know what you as a company need. They may not know your company culture. And they might not have spent enough time looking at what the needs of the people you're training are. And this is the key thing, and where we really get into this with the Innovation Foundation, because we work as a social innovation lab, and it all has to be based on this marriage of what does the employer need at a deeper level, not just we need more women, but what do you really need? Skills, competencies, mix, culture, and marrying that with what the individual needs, because if you don't get that right, it will never work.
True, very true, absolutely true. And I think some of us have at least been part of that, right? Get a training and we have no idea what to do with it. Amy, I'm not going to ask you a question around how to create framework. I want to ask you a different question around, creating the thought leadership. So you sit at the pinnacle of the thought leadership. And my question to you is, what is it that you see that is missing in terms of thought leadership? Because we are talking a lot of relevant topics here. And these, I have to say, although I read HBR quite often, I have to say some of these are also, probably that's missing. So what in your view is that we should close the gap?
Well, thank you for that. I would say the biggest gap is around how. And all of you talked a little bit about how, but the how is the hardest part. Coming up with the idea, it takes a lot of work. Takes a lot of smarts, you need a lot of data. You need to listen to all the stakeholders, you need to put together what you're hearing in a way that is practical. But then making something real is where the rubber meets the road and where people, it's the execution gap. And so when you're thinking about how you tell the story, the story cannot just be, here's the goal. The story has to be, and here's how it's worked when we've tried to bring it to life. And part of telling that story is drawing the before state. Everyone's dazzled by the after state. Everyone wants a piece of that. But the before state is where you establish relevance, right? But also the problems, the challenges that you encountered when you were trying to take this lofty idea and bring it to life in an organization, and understanding how much of the challenge was context, how much of the challenge was in the plan itself, and sharing that information, because the goal of your thought leadership, I hope, is to help others take your ideas and bring them to life in their own organizations, in their own careers. So a kind of an astringent focus on the how piece, very honest. It's never a bad idea to discuss where the process may have gone off the rails and your analysis of why and how you corrected it. Will I think help you reach the goal of putting your idea into an article, into a video, into a piece of thought leadership.
Very helpful, and I think, yes, the why is clear, probably the what is clear, the how is always the missing piece, right? Yes. Thank you. Yeah, sure.
So we are set up as a social innovation lab, so think like venture studio for social problems. But we agreed with the board when we changed this model that we would be judged not only on the quality of the things we produce out of the lab, but how well we open source everything. So we open source the methodology, the case studies, what worked, what didn't work, the profiles, everything, so that anybody, any of you, could take it and use it, and that's where you get to scale.
That's wonderful. And, Cynthia, probably you should share that with all of us, where we can find all of these open source hubs, because that's always the missing piece of the puzzle. Tripti, very much a good segue for me to ask you, because, you've been the chief talent and transformation officer for Novartis, large organizations, and I'm sure there are lots of these programs that you have implemented. So talk us through how. Talk us through how your lessons learned, how you have empowered women when it has come to both re and upskilling.
Let me first talk about what hasn't worked. So what hasn't worked is, in my 22 years in HR, I've rolled out programs for women. They were celebrated, they were really nice, it was great, but it only had so much impact. And we had to go and redraw a few things, is what is the real intention of the company? And is the leadership aligned with that? Are you ready to actually look within and say, yes, maybe we are not getting this right? And reframe and discuss, what do we do to get it right? Now, not to solve everything, but starting small, but intentional. Cynthia talked about, and Amy talked about making it accessible. The diversity and the thinking around gender, that needs to go into the design of it. The infrastructure process needs to be equitable and available, accessible for people. And we had to change all of that because we realized that there were years we were running very elitist programs, where people will have to leave their families to be there. And we had to go back to the drawing board and say, no, we're going to actually understand what are the barriers first to access. And that made us realize, first, people have different learning styles. They consume things differently. But also, everybody has a different situation. I grew up in a tiny village in India on the banks of a river. And how I evolved over the last 20, 25 years has been a journey. And many of us go through similar transitions, and at different stages, we are consuming things differently. So understanding how it will make a difference, that was second. And the third was we started designing things with people who will consume it. so that I'm not throwing things at people, but there is something that has gone into it. And then building the leadership buying and intention, as I said about culture, is you need to have a culture of curiosity, culture of experimentation, and people believing in it. If you fail once and you're off everything, that's not going to work. So those are the things we worked on. And then wiring it with hard processes, taking accountability. And it's a journey, but you can make a lot of difference in 18 months. So.
Absolutely, yeah. And one of the things that I feel when we talk about accessibility is technology, right? So you spoke about growing up in India, rural India, similar background. And I feel today the world is different because technology is accessible. There's not a single person, at least in India I can tell you, there's not a single person without a smartphone. So if you actually make it available on a smartphone, it's accessible. So Allison, I know this is your pet topic. So I want, and you advise, it's not just BCG, so you're responsible for all of the people and organization within BCG, which is one of the most respected organizations, but you also advise, and you're a sought-after advisor for most Fortune 500 companies. Talk us through how we can leverage technologies, because every time I think of technology, I also feel some of our inherent biases get into technology. So when we use technology for both and upskilling, talk us through, how we can leverage and how we can make sure that we are not bringing those biases onto these tech platforms.
So let me just say that I really think that technology and data really help to break many of the compromises we've experienced before. And it's both in terms of our ability to understand what skills we need, what skills people actually currently have. We're able with technology to infer them in many cases and capture them implicitly in ways that historically we weren't able to. So our understanding of skill sets is much, much greater. There's evidence which shows that when individuals sort of self-assess their own skills, they assess a far fewer number of skills than they actually have when technology and a much more data-oriented approach is used to capture all the things that they do. So again, I think both on the assessment of skills, the understanding of skills, and then the personalization of the upskilling and reskilling journeys. To your point before about we all learn differently, right? We all have different learning needs. We're all filling different gaps. And one of the other things I would say is on this personalized learning journey, the other thing we've seen, especially for women, is that there's a few things that really get in the way disproportionately of them accessing the upskilling and reskilling. And that's first and foremost around the flexibility in the offerings and the context and the support that they're given to do it. So the degree to which they're given time to do it, so they're not having to do it on their own time. The degree to which their manager is supportive. The degree to which it's actually going to lead to career advancement fundamentally changes the game for women actually wanting to do more and to participate more. So again, another area where the personalization and having technology really deal with some of these challenges, like we can have hybrid formats, you can actually access this on your phone, you can do it at off hours, really changes the game in so many ways.
Thanks, Allison. Yes.
If I may add, one of the practical usage of technology was when we use technology to make our job ads much more neutral, so that it'll appeal to both men and women and anyone else.
Especially in languages where there
Exactly.
is specific, yeah. Cynthia, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, to build on that, one of the things we've seen with the advent of Gen AI and the redesign of processes, everybody worries about using Gen AI and training it on data which is biased. At the same time, you can actually put Gen AI into your processes with nudges that actually provoke people to answer questions so that you can actually counteract biases that otherwise went undetected. So I'm actually excited by sort of what Gen AI can bring to the table in counteracting some of this bias.
Thanks, Allison. Cynthia, when we have worked together, I have really seen you firsthand make that social impact. So it's not just within the organization, it's really making that social impact. And many of the large-scale programs that we have at Edeco were actually incubated by your team. And one of the things that stands out in my mind is at the wake of the Ukraine war, like it was just a very quick turnaround. We had a platform which brought both the jobs and the job seekers, like connected it like just overnight, right? So, every time we think about programs like this, we also think about profits as corporates, so the private part of it. So I just want to hear from you, especially since you are really making that social impact on the ground. Talk us through some of those nuances in the public-private partnership.
Sure. So everything we do is in partnership with the idea that you have to have an ecosystem approach. And so Adecco Group is one of the partners. So let me give you a really concrete example. And this also touches on the technology bit. So we've got a project called Youth at Risk in Mexico. And this was to help young mothers, so think teenage mothers or teenage mothers who now are, say, in their 20s, who have never been in work, and how they could access the world of work. We saw that one of the key things that they struggled with was to acknowledge the skills and competencies they already had. And they were being told by everybody that they had none and they would never have a job. And so we partnered with a tech company that is a for-profit company, but a social enterprise, to actually create a tool that translates lived experience into skills and competencies, so that a young woman can describe what she does during her day, and it will use actually AI in the background to match this against the skills and competency framework, and then create essentially a CV that says what you can do. And the advantage there is, for us, we're helping build the pipeline of young women who will enter the world of work. They may not come through the Adecco door, they might go anywhere else, it doesn't matter, they're still getting into the workforce. For the social enterprise, they were in it because they wanted a new use case, and they wanted access to Mexico. So for them, it was good in terms of social impact because they are a social enterprise, but it was good for them commercially as well. So we can be this bridge to find what are all the different common interests and bring them together to solve a common problem. And so it's not either or. You don't need to be just for-profit, just not-for-profit. You're seeing much more gray area and much more true collaboration, not a donor-recipient kind of relationship. And I think that's where you bridge that.
True. And I think the other bridge that I can think of is thought leadership, right? Because platforms like HBR, for instance, we all read it and we all assimilate it, and this is what probably we go back and do tomorrow. So how do you, Amy, question is for you, how do you actually think we can use some of these thought leadership platforms to actually change that narrative?
Well, first you have to figure out what your narrative is, and you have to think about your narrative. You have to think about the goal of your narrative, but then you want to take your story where people can find it and where they can use it. And so, of course, I always, I want all the best ideas in HBR, but it's only one outlet. And there are different outlets that reach different people in different industries, in different regions, at different stages of their careers. So be very thoughtful about who you want to reach. And once you figure out who you want to reach, figure out what their media diet is. Don't expect them to come to you, you have to go to them. And then there's the part about selling your idea, right? The most important things, I think, when I'm looking at any pitch for an article for HBR, I always think about relevance and urgency. Is this an idea that touches our readers, our audience, in a way that is important? And is it urgent? Is this something that they're grinding their teeth about? Or does this speak to a set of goals that are passions for them? So you really want to, I think what I'm saying, if I were to sum it up, is think about what you want to say, who you want to reach, and how you're going to reach them. And there are lots of different ways to do it.
Exactly. It's actually tailored personalization, right? It's actually tailoring it to the audience.
Yeah.
Yes. And, we are running out of time, so I just want to close with hearing your thoughts on let's start with you, Allison. What does equality moonshot at workplace mean to you? Just 30 seconds.
What I would say is I would like a world where we move away from degrees and pedigrees to a world where we... Oh. Sorry. I want to move away from a world where we're overly focused on degrees and pedigrees to one where we're always on thinking about will and skill. And I think if we do that, that is going to change the landscape as we know it.
Tripti.
I have one word for it, which is intention.
Does it matter? It's okay. I think it's one where human-centered design is at the heart of how we craft work so that it satisfies what employers need and what people want.
And from my very specific perspective, it's a world where we share our goals, we share our ways forward, our methods, our frameworks, and we help each other across organizations and sectors and markets.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, all of you. I think it was wonderful, again, some of the corridor conversations, bringing it to life, especially with I can say with the three of you here. Some of the conversations bringing to life in front of such a large audience. And thank you for the intent listening. Thanks, Rupa. I can't see her, but thanks, Rupa, for creating this platform to have all these important conversations. And, please continue the conversations on your social media. Tag us, World Woman Foundation. And as you talk here, please also continue these conversations. Thank you again.